experimentation is the way you learn how to grow a business. And so it's about the quality and velocity of experiments, and it's based on the scientific process.
Do you want to impact the world and still turn a profit? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to Growth Everywhere. This is the show where you'll find real conversations with real entrepreneurs. They'll share everything from their biggest struggle to the exact strategies they use on a daily basis. So if you're ready for a value-packed interview, listen on. Here's your host, Eric Sue.
Before we jump into today's interview, if you guys could leave a review and a rating and also subscribe as well, that would be a huge help to the podcast. So if you actually enjoy the content and you'd like to hear more of it, please support us by leaving us a review and subscribe to the podcast as well. Thanks so much. All right, everybody. Today we have a repeat guest. His name is Sean Ellis. He's worked with great companies like Dropbox, Qualaroo, and he is now the CEO of GrowthHackers and the author of Hacking Growth. Sean, how's it going?
It's going great, Eric. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for being back here. So why don't you give people a quick refresher? What's your background? What is your story?
Sure. Yeah. So I spent the first 10 years of my career working at two startups that came in on the ground floor, 0 users on them, and built them up in the VP marketing role up to 2 companies that did NASDAQ IPO filing. So I left at the filing at both companies, or left the role at the filing. And then the second one was LogMeIn, which is now about a $5 billion valued company. And I, just looking back at those 2 companies, realized that a lot of the really heavy lifting value add stuff that I was doing and my team was doing was in the first 6 to 12 months of the like customer interaction. So once the product was built, once we validated that it was something people actually needed, those first 6 to 12 months were super valuable. So then I decided I was going to spend the next few years trying to just work in that upfront stage and get really good at that, because otherwise you don't really get much experience there if you're spending 5 years with a company like I had been doing. So that's when I went to Dropbox and spent 5 years spent 6 months with them, 6 months with Eventbrite, Lookout. So it's a bunch of companies where I could just kind of get it down to a systematic process of figuring out what really matters, when does it matter, and just sequencing, bringing those companies to market, and then launch my own business a few years ago with Qualaroo and now GrowthHackers.
Can you talk a little bit about Qualaroo, what it is, and what ended up happening to the company? Yeah.
So as I launched Qualaroo, as a business, as we were growing Qualaroo, we actually acquired it from Kiss Metrics, and it had been just a little side business that they had, and we thought we could run with it. So as we were building that up, we started GrowthHackers as almost kind of a tactical thing for Qualaroo. And so they both started growing sort of in separate directions. But Qualaroo is it's a qualitative kind of on the website, ask questions. You can answer questions, and so it informs the types of tests that you run to improve conversions on a website. And so we actually ended up selling that business about a year ago so that we could go all in on GrowthHackers. So yeah, that's what happened with it. And now we're focused on GrowthHackers.
Got it. And you don't have to give the exact number, but what was like the range of the sale?
It was, you can kind of do it for speed or do it for valuation. And for me, the whole goal was to get the full focus put onto GrowthHackers. So it was we had millions of dollars in recurring revenue, annual recurring revenue, and it was not a big multiple on that millions of dollars of recurring revenue. It was something that we probably could have sold it for more if we were totally focused on a sale, but I just wanted to get it done quickly, and it's been the right choice. But it was so.
Seems like the trend for you has always been kind of speed, in terms of like, let's grow this company quickly, let's move on to the next thing. Yeah, I mean, I think GrowthHackers is something that I'm really. What I saw with Qualaroo was that I didn't see the headroom in it. We got it to a point where it was profitable for us. I didn't see the headroom in that business that I saw in GrowthHackers, and I think focus is such an important asset for any founder. And so I felt like I needed to make a choice on one versus the other, and GrowthHackers was where my passion was and where I saw
I saw the potential to build a really big, interesting business with GrowthHackers.
Cool. And I know when you first came on, I mean, I was literally just starting this show. I think this is a couple of years ago, and you were just starting GrowthHackers.com. So can you talk about what GrowthHackers is, what it means, and kind of where you're at with the company today?
Sure. Yeah. So GrowthHackers is basically it's really trying to help with the movement that's already been happening with growth hacking across the fastest growing companies out there. And so everything from creating a community of practitioners, education to help people learn how to do it better. We have a conference around it, and then long term, I think our value is going to be in the software that we've built for helping cross-functional teams manage growth. And so it's really all of those things working together. Unfortunately, the software without understanding the process isn't very valuable. So we do need the training piece and the software. And then it's been a big advantage for us having built a community first that's a platform for launching these different businesses off of.
Great. And what does that community look like today in terms of, how many members, how many visitors a month?
It's in the hundreds of thousands of visitors per month. I mean, it's a pretty specialized audience at this point. Members is in the hundreds of thousands as well. I think for us, if we can do a better job with retention, we can probably grow it even faster. But to me, it's again, focus is a big part of the business. And so initially we didn't really have a business model with it. It was a passion project. And so it grew pretty quickly, but I've been really focused on leveraging the platform with these different businesses, and have been less focused on trying to grow the overall platform over the last year or two.
Cool. Yeah. And, just a side note for the audience, I actually do use the platform. We actually have like a weekly growth meeting, even with it from an agency perspective. So, being able to run a couple of tests per week and get everyone on the same page is great. I mean, people can see results. So I think you guys are definitely on to something there. So it is, what is it, $120 a month minimum?
In all of the iteration that businesses do, we've kind of gone through some transitions with it. And what I realized is that we were growing at a pretty good clip, but not enough to really cover the salaries of the team. And long term, we need to make this thing sustainable. So we've actually increased the price quite a bit to about $850 per month.
Wow.
Grandfathered people in, and then doing a lot more hands-on help to help people be successful with it. But it's all about trying to create a viable business around it. And what we figured is that if people implement it in the right way, it's worth
way more.
It's definitely worth a fraction of somebody's salary. And it's really, does it impact growth or does it not? And if it does impact growth, then I think we had more headroom to raise the price.
Totally. Yeah, totally agree with that. And that's how we think of it too. It's like, is this, people see it as, this is like another project management tool, but like, no, it actually helps you manage the process a lot better. And if you can get one successful test from it, it's going to pay for itself. That's how I see it. Right.
And I think the biggest thing is that growth hacking, conceptually, everybody thinks it's a good idea if they understand it correctly. But practically, it's actually pretty hard to do because it is cross-functional. You're working across various silos to run experimentation across the full customer journey. That requires a pretty sophisticated system for managing that communication and prioritizing experiments. And that's the system that we're trying to build with Growth Hackers projects.
One thing that leads up to Growth Hackers projects I think would be helpful for people to know is the concept of running, growth experiments. So can you speak to that a little bit? You wrote a good post on that. Experimentation
is the way you learn how to grow a business. And so it's about the quality and velocity of experiments, and it's based on the scientific process that you're running analysis. You're trying to find leverage within your overall customer acquisition and retention conversion model. And when you find an area where some focus should help, then running a set of tests and so basically building a backlog of ideas of things that you could do to improve that point within the funnel or tap into that channel. And then each test being written really as an experiment doc, much in like the scientific process way. So you've got a hypothesis, you've got any of your evidence on why it might work, and then details of how you would run that experiment. And then ultimately, each week it's about deciding which experiments, based on the resources that you have and what you think are going to work, which experiments should you be running.
Love it. Okay. So, you've talked a little bit about focus. I think you've alluded to it about 2 times already. So, what's one other constant thing that you've learned about growth after Dropbox, LogMe, and Qualaroo? You've worked with so many companies. What's like the one thing it's like, this is like the same thing I see every time?
The business is not growable. So I think that's for a marketer or a head of growth. It's really about, saying that if I execute perfectly, does this thing actually have potential? So I do think that the product dictates a lot the potential of a business. And then if it's a valuable product, then it's about figuring out who is passionate about the product, why are they passionate about the product, and then who externally who hasn't tried it yet could benefit from that same experience. So it starts with understanding very deeply within the funnel who are the people who can't live without the product, and I uncover that with a survey question. I ask, how would you feel if you could no longer use this product? I'm focusing on people who say they would be very disappointed, and then essentially, reverse engineering the creation of those people. How do they use the product? What path did they go down? And how do I expose a much bigger group to that same experience? And that ultimately getting people to a great, valuable experience leads to retained people, which is required for growth. So if you can't retain, you can't grow. And it all starts with understanding the experience that leads to retention.
Yeah, so you asked that question. I mean, what % of people are you expecting to answer very disappointed to know that you've reached product market fit?
Long term, what I've seen is that once you've optimized the business, that if you have about 40% or more of the users coming in who say they would be very disappointed without the product, once they've tried the product, then I found that those are pretty growable businesses. So whether that is, it's definitely product market fit for that group of people. Essentially, if you can retain people in the long term, you have product market fit for those people. And so the survey question is really a predictive metric for long-term churn. If they say they'd be very disappointed without the product, then they're likely going to stay on the product. But the really important metric is, can you retain them or not? And so what's interesting is that I have gone into companies where it's less than 10% of the users say they'd be very disappointed without the product. And then I focus on understanding those 10% of users. And one company I was able to go from a 7% to a 40% in just a couple of weeks by basically building a promise based on how the 7% who said they'd be very disappointed were using the product and the benefit they were getting, and then streamlining the onboarding process to that experience. The next cohort of people who signed up were over 40%. And by the time I left that company 6 months later, we were at 60% of the people. And that's one of the multi-billion-dollar companies that valuation today that I worked with in the early days.
Great. So basically you took a look at the cohort, the 7%, you surveyed them, you went into detail there, and then you created an action plan, and then that led to 40%, then 60%.
Yeah, that it starts with understanding the finish line, and then doing lots of testing to improve the onboarding. But in the benefit in their case was that they had 3 or 4 different pieces of the business that were sort of cluttering that user experience. So all we had to do was kind of hide a few of the pieces, highlight the one that led to long-term retention and engagement and people who were truly considering the product a must-have. And so that was a pretty fast one to get to a point where we could build a scalable growth engine. Once we had that, we had the product market fit that we could then start to really scale customer acquisition around that.
Great. Awesome. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the book. So what is the book, first of all, and why write a book?
Yeah, so the book is really covering a lot of the process that I used, as well as best practices that we saw other companies use. So I wrote it with Morgan Brown, and Morgan has probably written more case studies on the fastest growing companies than anyone I know, and very detailed. And that's the interesting thing is you can't market a business in private. Every time you're marketing a business, it's a bunch of public touch points. And so what he did was he took each of those public touch points and looked at any of the articles that were written. If he could get primary research, he'd go in and talk to the companies as well and understand their internal processes that were driving growth, and wrote growth studies on companies like Uber and Airbnb and a bunch of different companies. And I helped him somewhat with it, but he was doing the real heavy lifting there. And so what we looked at was, there's a transition happening in growth and marketing toward this full funnel experimentation across the funnel, across the customer journey. And it's hard. It's hard to get, basically a lot of the customer journey sits across different silos within organizations. And so it's really hard to get those teams working together. And there's a bunch of companies that have made breakthroughs in making that happen. And so what we wanted to do was just document in this book how these companies have done that and provide really a guide for other companies to understand how to embrace the principles of growth hacking and take their growth to the next level. And so I think we did a really good job in the book. So I'm excited to see what the feedback is when it comes out next month.
What is your goal behind it? What are you trying to get out of, after you release it? What do you hope to happen?
I think for me, I want people to understand what growth hacking is. Like I see so many people floating different definitions of it out there, and a lot of people think it's just silver bullets and shortcuts, but it's a hard process of rapid experimentation, and I want people to first understand what it is, and then understand how they can apply it in their own businesses, and that's my biggest goal, is just to the same reason why I didn't join Dropbox long term or Eventbrite long term or some of these companies where I saw the potential was huge, but I really wanted to try to figure this stuff out. And you figure it out by comparing multiple companies. And along the way, people were surprised that I was blogging pretty actively about what I was learning. But it was through the reputation that I built with that blogging that I was able to open up more opportunities for more learning. And it's I think that spirit of openness leads more people to figure out how this stuff's working, raises the bar on what does it take to be successful. And the book is really kind of the culmination of that, is actually taking the time to assemble it all in something that's super actionable and detailed on how companies can be successful with this. And I think what at the heart of this process that you probably picked up in what I've said already is that it has to be a valuable solution that retains people long term. And if there's a solution that's creating value, then I'm really passionate, and Morgan Brown's really passionate about helping people scale and bring that value to a lot more people. There's just a lot of impact that we can make in helping other companies get that same impact.
Awesome. Love it. And so that leads me to the next question. You've got the book, you've got Growth University. I think we'll talk about that in a second. And then you've got the conference too. So can you talk a little bit about the conference and what you're doing with that?
Yeah. So we've been running the Growth Hackers conference. I actually took it over from the original organizers last year, but I've been a participant and really active with it. In fact, I brought the original organizers together. They had both approached me separately to do it, and I was busy with something else at the time. And so I said, you guys should work together on this, and I'll be as active as I can be. And so, but we've had some great speakers over the years, and to me, it's kind of just a celebration of bringing people together in a single day who really geek out about this stuff and are excited about it. Get some great speakers to talk about it, but it's as much the community of practitioners coming together and just discussing it over lunch and after parties. And it's just good to kind of get out of your own bubble once a year or multiple times a year if you get that opportunity, and just compare notes, because your pool of experimentation is a lot smaller than a combined pool of experimentation across a big group of people. And so we do as much as we can to open people up. Like, I think the panels are a good way. Like, a lot of people kind of try to protect their good ideas, but if you put them on a panel together, egos take over, and one guy starts sharing his stuff and somebody else feels like they're very low value add. And so it just kind of brings everybody to sort of open up about it. And channels will be fleeting. Channels are going to change pretty rapidly. But trying to really break down not just what channels are working, but why are they working? What are the kind of fundamentals around it? It's that understanding that allows you to tap into the next emerging channel. And so I think the best practitioners understand that, and they're not so much hoarding what are today's short-term ideas that are working.
Love it. Yeah, and so that's actually completely true. I mean, on a blog or a podcast, for example, you can hide the good ideas one on a panel. I've seen it happen before too. Yeah, completely true. But
even if you intend to hide it,
it just comes out
when you start looking like you don't know anything because the other guy's opening up a lot. It brings that out of everybody, and it's fun to watch that happen.
Totally. So what is Growth University?
So Growth University is really, today it's built around the Growth Master role, and I think that's the piece that needs to be done right in a business to really tap into the power of growth hacking. So you can understand the concept, but if somebody isn't really managing the team around growth experimentation, so running your weekly growth meeting where you're bringing together these cross-functional people to work together, identify those best opportunities, and decide which experiments are going to be run and assign those experiments out. So that's right now we're focusing really on the growth master role because that's the pivot of making the whole thing work. And so it's a self-paced course. We're doing it through Teachable, and it's something that, once somebody takes the course, they can go back and dig back in. It becomes almost a reference guide, so they can go back into the sections on running an effective growth meeting or preparing for the growth meeting. And that's the main focus right now, is just equipping people with the skills to run the process inside their companies.
Love it. And so you have all these things that are centered around growth, and you talked about focus, and my question is, how do you manage all these different projects?
It's hard. I mean, it's one of those things that I wish I could only do one, but when I look at the opportunity and the sort of solution, the opportunity / problem and the solution to that problem, unfortunately, it's a multifaceted solution. If you just provide software, but you don't really help people understand what they should be trying to do, then the software is not going to fill the gap. If you explain to people what they should be trying to do and you do the training there, but you don't help facilitate the really challenging parts that the software does, then they're likely going to fail. And so for us, I think to really be successful with our broader mission of trying to help people tap into this growth hacking movement, that we need each of these pieces. And yeah, it does stretch the team kind of thin, but I think all the pieces are interdependent to helping companies be successful.
Yeah, that's the way I look at things too. I mean, there's this podcast, there's the other podcasts I do, and there's like software developing, and we have the agency too, but they all kind of tie in together, right? As long as you're focused in on one concept, which is growth for you, right, it works out, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, they're all different kind of pieces of the flywheel, and we, as a team, what we tend to look at is what's the piece that needs the most attention right now, and we realized that the training piece was where we really needed to help people, and so that's why we've put the effort into Growth University lately. Because what we found was we actually did it earlier, and in the spirit of kind of moving around and doing different things, we stopped doing it, and we did it in a way that wasn't very scalable, and so. But I found that people who had completed this course that I put together were actually much more successful with the product and with growth in general. And so it took kind of a year to go back to saying, gosh, we should probably do the course again. We were doing the course when the product was in private beta even, and so now with Teachable, we've done it in a way where I think it can scale much more effectively.
Cool. And how much is that course?
It's $299.
Oh, okay. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, the price may end up going up in a little while as we kind of hone in on it, but so it's good to kind of think of it as an introductory pricing right now. But once somebody's bought it, they have ongoing access to it.
Cool. Get it now, guys. So you guys have the community. What's the most effective thing that you're doing right now in terms of customer acquisition?
The sort of rise and fall of channels. We built that community off the back of Twitter, and which is a very natural loop with the community where people submit content. That content then goes into our Twitter queue, especially like once the community's curated the best content. Then the Twitter queue brings people back to discuss the content on our site. And so we built some homegrown tools to basically scrape our own site and feed those Twitter feeds and schedule them, like built them so that they fed into Buffer. And that worked really well. But Twitter as a channel is kind of on the decline now. And so as that declines, we've got other things going. But I think it's like having a good cadence of, we do 2 AMAs per week, so we've got one actually going right now as we talk. I know this isn't going to be broadcast live, but basically, being able to do the AMAs starts to give that kind of the repeat kind of getting people in the rhythm of coming back. we have our weekly top post lists on Mondays. Mondays end up being our best days. So we take the very best posts of the week, send them out in an email. That brings people back for more discussion. And so again, that kind of kicks that flywheel going. So I think for us in a given, in a given sort of 3 or 4 month period, we have, in a 6 month period, we have like 1 million plus people come through there. So for us, acquisition is not as much our challenge. Our challenge is much more retention. So that's why things like the email, things that drive that ongoing engagement are pretty important for us.
Awesome. So I want to switch gears now. What's one big change you made in the last year that has really impacted either you or your business in a big way?
Probably selling Qualaroo is the biggest change, because it's allowed me to focus on where I have the most passion. Fair
enough. That one's simple. How about a new tool that you've added in the last year that's added a lot of value that's not called Growth Hackers projects?
I think some of the stuff that we're doing with Segment has made it so that we can more easily plug other services on top of our data with Segment. So I think Segment's been pretty powerful for us in the last year.
Cool. And besides your book, Hacking Growth, what's one must-read book you'd recommend to everyone?
I have a bunch, kind of depending on what I'm trying to do at a given point.
The first one that comes to mind.
Like Power Presenter, Presenting to Win. I guess there's a couple of ones, but so that's a focus for me, is doing a lot more presenting. So I love Presenting to Win. And then I always go back and read the Cialdini books, just because I think essentially, the human psychology and just sort of understanding what drives response, what drives habits in people, I think is really important.
Yeah, I'm looking at the first interview that we did. You're actually episode 11 for this podcast. Holy crap! But yeah, that was the book you recommended, Influence, and then you said The Power Presenter.
Presenting to Win, I guess, with it. Yeah.
So we'll drop that in the show notes as well. In terms of, so you have growthhackers.com. It's really easy to get a lot of, growth tips around that. But what's one other, blog or publication or maybe podcast that you tune into every day?
Something that I've been doing a lot more recently is, obviously Growth Hackers is an aggregation of a bunch of content. So that points me into a lot of directions. But the shortcut that I've had for content is putting it into Pocket and then listening to the articles on Pocket. For me, so much of my day is staring at a computer. It's so nice to be able to go out for a walk and actually process all this content. And I think podcasts are beneficial that way too, that you can listen to them. Audiobooks are beneficial. So I just finished The Everything Store as an audiobook. Yeah, that was really good. And now I'm just forgetting the name of it, but I'll look up the one that I'm watching now or listening to now. Is The Upstarts, same author. Have you read that one?
That's a good one too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. It's the story of Uber and Airbnb and kind of the longer story, both the negative and positive, but really tries to give kind of a full 360-degree view of what's going on inside those companies. And I think the Audible just came out beginning of this year, so it's all pretty fresh. So, I'm bringing audiobooks, podcasts, and then just listening to articles. Where I find that I'm finding even the LinkedIn feed now is a lot better than it used to be, or Facebook feed for just putting the right articles in front of me. So I do get them from a lot of different areas. Smart.
Okay, cool. Well, that's a growth hack for learning right there. Sean, this has been awesome second interview. What's the best way for people to find you online?
Probably Twitter. So at Sean Ellis. Obviously, if you have any questions, post them on Growth Hackers, because we have Q&A on there, and I like to jump in and answer them as often as I can.
Cool. Awesome. So if you guys are in LA, check out the Growth Hackers conference. Check out the book as well, Hacking Growth. And if you want to keep learning growth, go to growthhackers.com. And if you're serious about growing your company, get Growth Hackers Project. So Sean, thanks again for doing this.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Growth Everywhere. If you loved what you heard, be sure to head back to growtheverywhere.com for today's show notes and a ton of additional resources. But before you go, hit the subscribe button to avoid missing out on next week's value-packed interview. Enjoy the rest of your week, and remember to take action and continue growing.